Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I hope you're ready to travel today because we are looking at a stack of research here that covers, well, arguably the most iconic structures in human history.
And maybe the most numerous, believe it or not.
Right. I was looking at the numbers in this first article you sent over, and it says there are over 100,000 castles still standing in Europe.
100,000.
It's a staggering amount of stone. It's almost hard to comprehend.
It is. And when you see that number or, when you see a castle on a postcard, you tend to think of them as these static, romantic backdrops.
Sure. A nice place for a tour. Maybe you buy a little plastic sword in the gift shop.
Exactly. But if you actually listen to what these 100,000 witnesses have to say, the story changes completely.
Yeah. The sources we have today are definitely not your average travel brochures. We are looking at these buildings as vessels for secrets. And I don't just mean, secret passage behind the bookcase kind of secrets.
Although we have those too.
We do have this too. But I mean the really dark stuff.
We're talking about stone cold secret. The whole mission for this deep dive is to sort of strip away that Disney veneer. We need to look at the engineering marvels for sure, but also the psychological torture, the architectural deception, the occult rituals, and the unsolved murders that are literally baked into the mortar.
Scanning the outline here, some of this stuff seems, well, almost impossible. We've got a castle built on a literal optical illusion. We have a monster bricked up inside a wall, a real-life inspiration for Frankenstein, and this is the one I'm still trying to wrap my head around, a prison escape involving a glider.
Built in an attic.
A glider built in an attic.
It is one of the most incredible stories of human ingenuity you will ever hear. It really shows that these aren't just piles of rock. They're monuments to the extremes of human behavior. Desperation, obsession, cruelty, and brilliance.
Well, let's get into it. I want to start with this theme you've laid out, the art of deception, because I always assumed a castle was a pretty honest thing. Big walls, big towers, I'm strong, stay away. But you flagged Bodiam Castle in England as a prime example of lying.
Bodiam is a fascinating place to start because it is, in a way, the Instagram versus reality of the 14th century.
Okay.
If you look at the photos in the source material, what do you see?
It looks perfect. I mean, it sits right in the middle of this wide moat. It's got these soaring round towers, the crenellations at the top. It looks like the archetype of a medieval fortress.
Exactly. It presents this image of impregnable power. But Bodiam, which was built in 1385 by Sir Edward Dallingrige, it's a fraud.
A fraud? In what way? Is it made of plywood?
Not quite, but it's all about the builder's insecurity. See, Dallingrige was a knight, but he wasn't from the old established nobility. He was what we'd call new money. He'd made his fortune fighting in France.
So he wanted to show off.
He wanted to project status, so he hired architects to use a technique called forced perspective.
Forced perspective, like they use in theme parks to make the castle look taller?
Precisely. That's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
If you look closely at the architectural diagrams we have here, you'll see that the battlements and the windows on the upper stories are built significantly smaller than standard dimensions.
Okay, so how does that help? I'm not quite getting it.
It tricks the human eye. When you're on the ground looking up, your brain expects those windows to be full size. Because they're smaller, your brain subconsciously assumes they must be much further away than they actually are.
So it makes the whole structure look taller.
Taller and much more imposing. It's an architectural lie to boost his ego.
That is incredibly petty. I love it.
Oh, it gets better. The moat. That beautiful wide moat.
Yeah.
It wasn't primarily for defense. A wide, still moat like that acts as a perfect mirror. It reflects the entire castle structure, visually doubling its size for anyone approaching. It was designed to intimidate his neighbors and impress guests, not to stop an army.
So if a real army actually showed up with, siege engines and catapults, what happens to Bodiam?
It likely crumbles fairly quick. The walls are thinner than they look, and the interior is designed more for comfort, like a manor house, not for withstanding a long siege. It's a stage set, a very, very convincing.
But even a fake fortress can have real hauntings, right? The notes mention a red lady in the tower.
Yes, a classic spectral figure, seen staring out at the horizon, supposedly waiting for a lover who never returned from war. But there's a more tangible and frankly more eerie report from the castle staff. As recently as the 1990s, a custodian reported seeing a Victorian child standing on the main bridge.
Just standing there.
No, walking. He starts crossing the bridge over the moat, but he never reaches the other side. He just vanished into thin air mid-stride.
Wow.
The implication of the story that's grown around it is that he fell and drowned while playing where he shouldn't have been, and his spirit is just stuck in that final moment.
That gives me the creeps. Okay, so Bodiam is about looking tough, but Caerphilly Castle in Wales. This place actually seems tough. I mean, it's huge.
Caerphilly is a beast. It's the second largest castle in Britain after Windsor. It was built by a Norman lord named Gilbert de Clare, nicknamed Red Gilbert.
You don't get a nickname like Red Gilbert by being subtle.
Not at all. And this is where we see engineering used not just for defense, but to dominate nature itself.
The notes talk about water defenses, but looking at the map here, it's way more than just a moat. It's like a series of lakes.
It is. Red Gilbert didn't just dig a ditch. He dammed the local streams and flooded the entire valley. He created massive artificial lakes that surrounded the castle on multiple sides. This was a message to the Welsh rebels. It wasn't just, I control this stone. It was, I control the very landscape you live on.
But even with all that power, looking at this photo here, that one tower is definitely not straight.
No, it is not. That is the southeast tower. It leans over 10 degrees.
10 degrees.
For context, the Leaning Tower of Pisa leans about 4 degrees. This is more than double that.
Whoa! 10 degrees feels like it should have just fallen over by now. What happened? A big cannonball.
For centuries, people thought it was damage from the English Civil War. Cannon fire or Oliver Cromwell's forces trying to deliberately slight it to make it useful. But modern analysis suggests it's actually a geological failure.
The ground.
Essentially, yes. When the moat was drained centuries later for maintenance, the water pressure holding up the surrounding soil was removed. The ground subsided, and the earth literally shifted under the immense weight of Red Gilbert's ego.
So nature gets the last laugh. Now let's move to Spain. Coca Castle. This one looks completely different from the British ones. It's brick, for one thing.
And what a beautiful brick. It's a masterpiece of Mudéjar architecture, that incredible blend of Islamic and Christian styles you see in Spain. It was built by a Moorish architect named Ali Caro. But what makes Coca so unique, so clever, is that it's the invisible castle.
Invisible? I mean, I can see it right here in the picture.
Well, most castles sit on a hill, right, to command the high ground. Coca sits on a flat. You don't look up at it. You look down and it rises from a deep, wide, sunken moat. You almost don't see the true scale of it until you are standing right on the edge of this massive pit.
That seems counterintuitive for defense. Wouldn't that make it easier for people to just shoot down it?
You'd think so, but you have to remember the context. This was the dawn of the age of artillery. Cannons were starting to destroy traditional flat stone wall. If you sink the castle, you lower its profile, making it a much harder target to hit from a distance. But the real genius is in the brickwork itself. Look at the walls. They aren't flat.
Yeah, they're angled. They look like almost like crystals or facets on a gem.
That's pure physics. If a cannonball hits a flat wall at a 90-degree angle, the wall absorbs 100% of that kinetic energy. That's how walls shatter. But if you angle the wall, the cannonball glances off. The energy is deflected side. It's the difference between punching a brick wall and punching a slanted roof.
That is seriously smart. And I'm guessing that sunken moat wasn't exactly a swimming pool for the garrison.
No, it was a dry moat. And that's terrifying in its own way. If you attack, you first have to climb down into this deep pit. Once you are down there, you are in what military strategists call a killing zone. The defenders are high above you on all sides, and you have absolutely zero cover. It's essentially a giant trap designed to herd soldiers into a slaughter.
Deception and deadly engineering. But sometimes a castle isn't about war at all. Sometimes it's about, well, losing your mind.
And for that, we're heading to Germany, to Neuschwanstein.
The Disney castle. The one on all the puzzles, all the postcards?
The very same. But the story behind it is deeply tragic. This is the brainchild of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the Swan King.
I was reading about the construction costs here in the notes, and this one detail just floored me. It says 14 carpenters worked for 4 just on the royal bed.
That detail alone tells you everything you need to know about Ludwig's priority. He wasn't building a fortress. He was building a stage set for a life he couldn't live. He was obsessed with the operas of Richard Wagner knights, dragons, the Holy Grail. He wanted to be the prince slaying dragon, but he was a king in a rapidly modernizing world where kings were losing their power.
So he just retreats into this fantasy world he's building.
Completely. Neuschwanstein has absolutely no defensive value. It's pure aesthetic. It's a monument to Wagner, who ironically never even visited the place. But this obsession, this construction project, it bankrupted the state and completely alienated his government ministry.
And this leads directly to the mystery of his death. The sources are pretty suspicious about this insanity diagnosis.
It's incredibly suspicious. A panel of doctors declared him insane without ever examining him. Not one. It was, for all intents and purposes, a political coup. They deposed him and sent him to Berg Castle. The very next day, Ludwig went for a walk with his psychiatrist, a Dr. Bernhard von Guten.
And they never came back.
They were both found floating in Lake Starn in very shallow water. And Ludwig was a strong swimmer. The official ruling was suicide by drowning.
But the doctor was dead too. That doesn't add up.
Exactly. And the doctor's body showed clear signs of a struggle. Bruises, scratches. The prevailing theory is that Ludwig tried to escape. The doctor tried to stop him. A fight broke out, and, well, who knows? Maybe Ludwig was murdered by agents watching from the shore, or maybe he had a heart attack in the cold water. We will never truly know.
It's the ultimate cliffhanger. And speaking of eccentrics, we have to talk about Pina Palace in Portugal. This place, it looks like a fever dream. You've got yellow towers, red walls, all these different architectural styles mashed.
It is the absolute embodiment of 19th century Romanticism. King Ferdinand II was the creator here. He was German, actually, and a cousin of Ludwig II, so maybe it runs in the family.
Ah.
But Ferdinand was a very different man, deeply intellectual, a man of culture, and he was a grand master of the Rosicrucians.
The secret society with all the esoteric symbolism.
Yes. So when you look at that chaotic, almost childish mix of colors and shape, you're not just seeing bad taste, you're seeing symbols. The entire palace is designed as an initiation path. There are references to alchemy, to mythology, to the unification of opposites. It's a temple to hidden knowledge, disguised as a brightly colored summer.
We're definitely going to get deeper into the esoteric stuff in Portugal later because there's a lot of it. But I want to touch on Olite Castle in Spain before we leave this theme of royal madness. Because while Ludwig had his wood carvings, Charles III of Navarre had actual lions.
He did. Charles III, known as the Noble, turned Olite into a pleasure palace. He was determined to make it the most luxurious, most talked-about court in all of Europe. And in the medieval world, the ultimate status symbol was a menagerie.
A zoo inside the castle walls.
A full-blown zoo.
Yeah.
We're talking lions, camels, giraffes, zebras. Can you imagine being a peasant in medieval northern Spain, walking past the castle walls and hearing a lion roar? You would think the gates of hell had opened up. You'd have no frame of reference for that sound.
And there's a sad story connected to this place too, right? The Prince, Charles of Viana.
Yes, the luxury hid a lot of family dysfunction. Charles of Viana was the rightful heir to the throne, but his own father usurped. Charles was imprisoned on and off in the very castle he should have been. The legend says his ghost haunts the place, sometimes accompanied by a tame lion he kept as a pet. In his portraits, his face looks twisted, transfigured by the stress and the madness of his situation.
From the madness of kings to the misery of prisoners, let's talk about dungeons, because usually we think of a dungeon, but Colditz Castle in Germany, they turned imprisonment into an art.
Colditz is legendary. During World War II, the Nazis designated it Oflag Ivy. It was a Sonderlager, a special camp for Allied officers who had already escaped from other prisons.
Which, in hindsight, seems like a massive man. Let's take all the smartest, most determined, most resourceful escape artists and put them all in the...
It was a catastrophic error on their part. It became an academy of escape. The prisoner, British, French, Polish, Dutch, they shared techniques, they pooled their knowledge, their tools, their maps. The ingenuity is just mind-blowing. Take the French tunnel, for example.
The notes say it was 44 meters long. 44 meters. How do you dig that far without anyone noticing Albiter?
That's the classic problem, right? Displacement. They found an old, disused clock tower shaft and started working their way down and out. They had a team of lookouts, or stooges, who would carry the dirt out in small bags hidden inside their trousers. Then they'd go up to the attic and carefully disperse it under the floorboard. They even managed to wire the tunnel into the castle's main electrical grid, so they had light to work by.
That is incredibly bold. But the glider, I really need you to explain this. How on earth do you build an airplane in a prison attic?
This was the brainchild of two British pilots, Bill Goldfinch and Jack Beth. They realized the castle was perched high on a cliff. If they could get a glider up to the roof, they could just float across the river, molded to freedom.
Okay, fine, but materials, you can't just order a glider kit.
They improvised everything. They systematically stole floorboards and bed slats for the ribs of the wing. They used sleeping bags for the skin of the glider, treating the fabric with boiled millet soup to shrink and stiffen it, like proper dope varnish on an aircraft. They made a compass from a melted phonograph record and a magnetized needle. They built a fully functional two-man glider behind a false wall in the attic.
And the launch. You can't just push it off the roof.
No, you need speed. So they built a gravity-fed catapult. They found a disused chimney shaft, filled a metal bathtub with concrete and rocks, and rigged a complex pulley system. The plan was, drop the bathtub full of concrete down the shaft, the rope yanks the glider forward, and it shoots off the roof into the night.
Did it fly? Did they make it?
The war ended literally days before they were scheduled to launch. American forces liberated the castle. But here's the kicker. Years later, a team of aviation experts built a replica, using only the materials and plans the prisoners had, and they launched it from the castle. It flew perfectly. It would have worked.
That is actually inspiring. But then we have Lincoln Castle in England, which feels like the complete opposite. It wasn't about escaping a physical prison. It was about crushing the soul.
Lincoln is a very dark place. In the Victorian era, they were pioneers of something called the separate system. The theory at the time was that criminals were corrupted by contact with other criminals. So the solution was absolute, total isolation.
The chapel description here is what gets me. Coffin-like pew. What does that even mean?
It's chilling. In a normal church, you sit on a bench next to other people. In Lincoln's prison chapel, you stood inside a tall, narrow wooden box. You could see the preacher up in the pulpit, but the sides were so high you couldn't see the prisoner to your left or right. You couldn't whisper. You couldn't pass a note. You couldn't even make eye contact. You were completely alone in a crowd of hundreds.
It's psychological torture disguised as religious reform.
Precisely. And Lincoln was also the home of a man named William Marwood, the official hangman. He introduced a different kind of science to the castle.
The long drop.
Yes. Before Marwood, hanging was often a slow, agonizing strangulation. Marwood was a cobbler by trade, a man of measurement. He realized that if you dropped a person from a sufficient height, the force mass times acceleration would snap the cervical vertebrae instantly. He created meticulous tables to calculate the exact length of rope needed based on each prisoner's weight.
It's grim, but he saw it as a form of mercy.
He did. He saw himself as a professional, bringing a swift scientific end to what had been a brutal, drawn-out act.
Now, if Lincoln was hell, Manzanares El Real in Spain was, what, a gilded cage? We're back to the story of Joanna the Mad.
Poor Joanna. History's been very unkind to her. She was the daughter of Isabella the Catholic, one of the most powerful women in the world. Joanna became queen, but she was surrounded by powerful men who wanted her power, her husband, her father, and eventually her own son, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V.
And the narrative was that she was crazy, that she lost her mind.
That was the convenient story. They claimed she was insane with grief over her husband's death and unfit to rule, so they locked her up. But Manzanares wasn't a dungeon. It was a palace fort. She had tapestries, fine clothes, good food, servants, but she was strictly forbidden from leaving or communicating with the outside world.
It's gaslighting on a royal international scale.
It is. She spent decades looking out of those beautiful windows, knowing she was the rightful queen of Spain, but having absolutely no agency. It really makes you wonder how much of madness in history is just women being inconvenient to powerful men.
That's a heavy thought. Let's pivot to something, well, darker in a different horror, the supernatural. And we have to start with the heavyweight champion, Castle Frankenstein.
In the Odenwald Forest, Germany, the ruins of Burg Frankenstein.
Now, I always assumed Mary Shelley just picked the name out of a hat because it sounded spooky, but the notes say she actually went there.
She did. In 1814, when she was just 17, she took a journey down the Rhine River. She stopped very close to the castle. And the locals, you know how it is, would have been telling stories about the castle's most infamous resident, a man who had lived there a century earlier, Johann Conrad Dippel.
And Dippel wasn't just a landlord, he was an elf.
He was the real deal, or at least he thought he was a theologian turned scientist turned, well, madman. He had a laboratory in the castle. He was obsessed with anatomy and the idea of transferring souls between bodies.
And it's Dippel's oil. That sounds unpleasant.
A horrific concoction. He distilled it from pulverized animal bones and blood. He claimed it was the elixir of life. You can only imagine the smell that must have come from that castle laboratory. He was also accused of grave robbing to get human bodies for his experiments.
So you have a guy boiling bones, robbing graves, talking about soul transfer. It's not a big leap to it's alive.
Exactly. And his own death sealed the legend. He was found in his lab, foaming at the mouth, surrounded by dismembered body parts. He likely poisoned himself with his own strange chemicals. Mary Shelley takes that local reality, adds a bolt of lightning, and basically creates the modern horror genre.
Speaking of gruesome deaths, the Mouse Tower in Germany, this one feels like a Brothers Grimm story that they decided was too gross to publish.
It's visceral, isn't it? The villain is Hatto II, the Archbishop of Mainz in the 10th century. A terrible famine hit the region. The peasants were starving. Hatto, meanwhile, had his barns full of grain, but he refused to lower the prices or give any away.
And the story goes that he gathered them all in a barn.
He told the starving peasants to gather in a large barn on his estate, and he would feed them. Once they were all inside, he had the doors barred and set the barn on fire. As they were screaming, he reportedly mocked them, saying, "Hear the shrieking of the mice."
Comparing starving human beings to pests, that is pure evil.
And the legend provides the ultimate poetic justice. From the ashes of that burned-out barn, an army of thousands of mice emerged. Hatto was terrified. He fled to his stone tower on a small island in the Rhine River, thinking the water would protect him.
But mice can swim.
They can swim. They swarmed the island, they gnawed through the wooden doors of the tower, and they ate the Archbishop alive.
I know that's probably folklore, but
Oh, it's almost certainly folklore. The name Mouse Tower likely comes from a mistranslation of an old German word for watchtower or toll tower. But the fact that people kept telling this horrifying story for centuries tells you everything you need to know about how much they hated the aristocracy. It's a revenge fantasy written in blood.
Okay, from mice to whatever was at Glamis Castle in Scotland. This place sounds like Grand Central Station for ghosts, but the monster of Glamis is the one that...
This was the open secret of the Victorian era. The rumors were that the Earl of Strathmore had a son, the rightful heir, who was born with severe deformities. The descriptions are wild. Barrel-chested, hairy, no neck, a head like a frog.
And instead of, helping him, they boxed him up.
They kept him in a secret chamber, hidden deep within the 16-foot-thick walls of the castle. He was fed through a small slot in the wall. He lived his entire life and died in the dark.
Is there any truth to it at all, or is it just a ghost story?
Well, there's a records gap in the family lineage right around that time, a missing heir. And there's a famous story about a workman who was doing repairs, tapped on a wall, and found a hollow space leading to a hidden corridor. The Earl allegedly paid him a massive sum of money to emigrate to Australia immediately and never speak of it again.
That's pretty suspicious. And Glamis also has Earl Beard, card player.
The gambler. This is a classic deal with the devil story. Earl Beardy was playing cards on a Saturday night. His servant warned him it was almost midnight, the beginning of the Sabbath, and you do not gamble on the Sabbath.
And Beardy didn't care.
He was furious. He shouted, "I will play until doomsday if I have to. I'd play with the devil himself."
You should never say that. Be careful what you wish for.
The clock struck 12. A tall stranger in dark clothes knocked on the door and asked if the Earl still needed a partner. He sat down. The servants outside heard screaming and swearing from behind the locked door. Then silence. When they finally got the door open, the room was empty. The legend says Beardy is now condemned to play cards with Satan in that secret room for all eternity.
For a deep dive, we are spending a lot of time on ghosts. But let's shift gears slightly to the esoteric, because you mentioned the Knights Templar earlier, and I know people love a good Templar mystery.
And Portugal is the place to go. When the Templars were disbanded across Europe in the 1300s, they didn't just disappear in Portugal, they rebranded. They became the Order of Christ. And their castles, like Tomar and Almirol, are just heavy with symbolism.
Tomar has that famous round church, the Chirola.
The Chirola. It's magnificent. It's built to mimic the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but it has a very practical military design too. The doorway is huge so that the knights could ride their horses into the church itself. They would attend Mass in the saddle, circle the central altar, receive a blessing, and ride straight out to battle. It perfectly blends the warrior and the monk.
And Almirol. That's the one on the tiny island in the river.
Yes, it's just breathtaking.
Yeah.
And because it was such an important Templar stronghold, there are persistent legends of underground tunnels running beneath the riverbed, hiding the lost Templar treasure or their secret archives.
Tunnels, again. It's always tunnels. But the most Da Vinci Code place has to be Quinta da Regal. This isn't medieval, though, right?
No, this is much later, early 20th century. It was built by a man known as Montero the Millionaire. He was incredibly wealthy and completely obsessed with the occult Masons, Templars, Rosicrucians, alchemy. He basically built an adult playground of symbolism.
The initiation well is the famous part. I've seen photos. It looks like a tower, but it's going down into the ground.
It's an inverted tower. You don't climb up to the sky. You climb down into the earth. It's 27 meters deep with a spiral staircase, and it has 9 landings on the way down, which are meant to represent the 9 circles of Dante's hell.
So what was it for? It wasn't for water, was it?
No, it was never a water source. It was for ritual. The idea was that an initiate would descend into the darkness, symbolizing death, or the womb of the earth. At the very bottom, there is a compass rose laid over a Templar cross in the marble. Then from there, you have to navigate through a network of dark underground tunnels to find your way back to the light. It's a simulator for death and rebirth.
That is some serious dedication to a metaphor. And speaking of magical thinking, we have a pope in Spain who people thought was a wizard.
Papa Luna, Benedict XIII. He was the anti-pope during the Great Schism of the Church. The councils in Rome declared him illegitimate, but he refused to resign. He locked himself away in the sea fortress of Peñíscola on the coast of Spain.
And because he was a scholar, people got suspicious.
He was a brilliant intellectual, a man of science and theology, but he was isolated in this stone fortress, surrounded by books and what looked like chemical equipment for alchemy. The locals didn't understand what he was doing. They started a rumor. They said he built the massive staircase down to the sea in a single night using magic. They said he possessed a magical ship that could fly him to Rome.
It really shows that any sufficiently advanced intellect looks like magic to the eye.
It's the perfect example of that.
We've covered a lot of darkness here. I want to try and find some light. Let's talk about the themes of love and honor, because these castles weren't just for murderers and madmen.
That's true. Look at Kidwelly Castle in Wales. It's haunted, yes, but the story behind the ghost is one of incredible bravery. Princess Gwenveliam.
The Headless Prince.
She was a Welsh princess in the 12th century. Her husband was away fighting. The Norman invaders attacked her lands. Instead of hiding, she donned armor and led the army into battle herself. She's the only woman of the medieval period known to have led a Welsh army in battle.
But she lost the battle.
She was defeated, betrayed by a rival Welsh prince, actually, captured and beheaded on the battlefield by the Norman. Her ghost is said to roam the field looking for her head, which is gruesome, yes, but you have to remember, she is a national hero in Wales. Her haunting keeps her memory as a warrior alive.
And then there's Guimarães in Portugal. Cradle of Honor. This story
This is a story about the absolute extreme of honor culture. Moniz was the trusted tutor to the young prince who had become the first king of Portugal. The prince was at a bad spot and had to sign a peace treaty with the king of Leon in Spain. Moniz personally guaranteed on his own life that the prince would keep his word.
But the prince didn't keep his word, did he?
No. Once he was safe and his army was stronger, the prince broke the treaty. Muniz was devastated. His personal honor was tarnished, so he didn't hide. He traveled to the Spanish court. He walked into the throne room with his wife and children, and he was wearing a rope around his neck.
He was literally offering himself up to be hanged.
He said, "My prince broke his word. I guaranteed it with my life, so take my life as payment for the broken oath."
That's intense.
It shocked the Spanish king. He was so moved by this display of absolute, unwavering integrity that he forgave the debt and spared Moniz's life. It became a foundational myth for the nation of Portugal, this idea that their identity is built on keeping your word, no matter the cost.
Finally, let's go to Heidelberg in Germany, a story of passion that literally left its mark on
the knight's footprint. It's great. If you go to the castle terrace today, there's a deep impression in the sandstone that looks exactly like the bottom of a heavy boot.
What happened?
The story is a classic farce. A knight was visiting a lady in the castle. They were, say, occupied. Suddenly, the prince, or the husband, the story changes, returned home early. The knight had no way out but the window. He jumped fully armored from the third story onto the stone terrace below.
And he landed so hard he dented the rock.
That's the legend. He survived and ran off into the night. It's a funny story, but like the witch's bite on the castle gate ring, a crack where a witch supposedly tried to bite through the solid iron, it serves a purpose. It takes a cold, imposing stone structure and gives it a human scale. It makes the stones talk.
So let's zoom out. We've looked at deception, madness, torture, horror, magic, and honor. When you look at these 100,000 castles now, what do you see?
I see stone recording. These aren't just military bunkers anymore. They are physical manifestations of the human condition. We see the paranoia and insecurity of Dalingridge at Bodiam. We see the escapism and tragedy of Ludwig at Neuschwanstein. We see the systematic cruelty of the separate system at Lincoln.
It's interesting how the function changed over time, too. We went from keep them out with the water at Caerphilly to keep them in at Colditz to let me dream at Pina Palace.
Exactly. The walls started as protection, they became prisons, and eventually they ended up as canvases for fantasy.
Here's a provocative thought to leave our... We've talked about mice-eating bishops and headless knights walking past their son. We know these are almost certainly myths invented to explain real trauma or to enforce a moral code.
Right. We tell stories to make sense of things we don't understand.
So what are the castles today? What are we building right now that will be standing in 1,000? Is it a skyscraper, a nuclear waste repository buried deep in a mountain, a massive server farm out in the desert?
And what legends will people tell about them when all the context is gone?
Exactly. Will people in the future look at the ruins of a data center and say it was a temple to a silent god where we sacrificed our... Will they look at the penthouse of a Wall Street tower and say a giant lived there who feasted on the fort?
The stones survive, but the context fades, and imagination rushes in to fill that gap. That is the history of castles, and it will be the history of us.
So next time you're at a ruin, don't just read the plaque. Look at the mortar. Look for the cracks, the strange marks. There is always a secret hider.
Always.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.